If you believe the commercials, you would think that Christmas is always the happiest time of the year. But we all know that for many people, the sights and sounds of Christmas trigger despair rather than happiness. I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day is a Christmas carol for those people. It's based on Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, Christmas Bells, written in 1863 when our country was being torn apart by the Civil War. The tragic story behind the poem helps us understand the deep meaning behind the hymn. Longfellow's first wife had died almost 30 years earlier when he was 28 years old. He had just accepted his dream job as a professor at Harvard, but the university required him to travel and study in Europe for a year before starting. 6 months into the trip, his beloved wife died, and he was devastated. But he continued on his trip. A few months later, he met the Appleton family and traveled with them for a while. Mr. Appleton was a wealthy businessman from Massachusetts, and his daughter Fanny was a lively young woman who tended to live life big. She was a great listening ear and a companion for him. They became close friends and continued to see each other after returning to Massachusetts. She was happy to be friends with Longfellow, but she shunned any romance from him. 4 years later, he published Hyperion, which was a sort of autobiographical novel where the two main characters were based on Fanny and himself. But rather than being flattered, it is said that she took it as a public humiliation. So for the most part, they parted ways for the next 4 years, until in 1843 they were reunited, and she had a change of heart. In a whirlwind romance, they were married that same year. They were one of those couples where each completed the other in many ways. They had a total of 6 children together, but sadly one of them died as an infant. And then tragedy struck the family again in 1861. Fanny was making wax seals with her young daughters when her dress caught on fire. Hearing the screams, her husband ran in from his study, and he fought to extinguish the flames, first with a rug and then with his own body. Both of them were badly burned, and Fanny died the next morning. Henry's wounds were so severe that he was unable to attend her funeral, which was held several days later on their 18th wedding anniversary. Her death hit him very hard. She had been his poetic muse, and writing became difficult for him. At Christmas that first year, he wrote, "A Merry Christmas, say the children, but there is no more for me." He worried that his grief was so severe he would end up in an asylum. 2 years after Fanny's death, the Civil War was raging, and it seemed like every family was touched by the conflict. Longfellow was an avid abolitionist, but he was against the war. Without his knowledge and against his wishes, his oldest son, at 18, traveled to Washington, D.C. in order to join Lincoln's Union forces. Then on December 1st of that year, Henry received a telegram telling him that his son had been shot and he needed to come home for a long recovery. It was that Christmas, with so much sadness all around, that inspired Christmas Bells. In a Gospel Coalition article from 2014, Justin Taylor says that Longfellow, as a 57-year-old widowed father of 6 children, the oldest of which had been nearly paralyzed as his country fought a war against itself, wrote a poem seeking to capture the dynamic and dissonance in his own heart and in the world that he observes around him that Christmas Day. Casting Crowns made a version of the hymn where the melody captures that dissonance that Longfellow was dealing with in 1863. The chimes were ringing out the joyful Christmas carols, while everything in his world was covered with sorrow. He was having trouble seeing beyond the pain and sorrow that he saw all around him. The version of the hymn that's in most of our hymnals reorders the poem's stanzas and leaves out two of them from the middle that talk about the war and the way it tore asunder the peace that Americans had probably taken for granted just a few years earlier. The first two stanzas lay out a description of hearing the bells in Cambridge, Massachusetts on that Christmas day in 1863, and thinking about how churches all across the Christian world, even throughout this war-torn country, were doing the same thing. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat, of peace on earth, goodwill to men. I thought how as the day had come, that belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. The phrase, peace on earth, goodwill to men, that is repeated at the end of each verse, comes from Luke 2:14, where the host of angels appeared to the shepherds at the Savior's birth. But peace was very far from the life of Longfellow, and really from all of America that year. Verse 3 of the hymn describes the despair that he and so many others feel as they see the lights and hear the sounds of Christmas all around them, when peace and goodwill seem so very far away. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But he kept listening, and the continued song of the bells reminded him that God's truth is greater than his feelings of despair. Yet pealed the bells more loud and deep, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime, of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Jesus didn't come to earth to merely give us a jolly holiday to celebrate with friends and family. There's certainly nothing wrong with these things, but his purposes were deeper. They were to bring true hope to the very people who struggle with despair. He came to seek and to save the lost. Isaiah 9:2 says it this way, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. If you or someone you know is living in that kind of despair, be encouraged. You and your situation is the very reason he came. His truth is more true, and his loving kindness is deeper than our human minds can ever comprehend. The one who created the earth and who holds it in the span of his hand, he loves you fully where you are, and he will carry you through to the end. Even if it doesn't feel like it now, there will come a day that you look back and see that his loving arms were upholding you every moment through even the darkest of days. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men.